But I'll bring it to the future at 1:30. Having an official sticker now on your.
The House will come to order. Members will please take your seats. Sergeant at Arms.
The House is now in session. All persons not entitled to privileges on the floor, please retire to the gallery.
The members will rise and be led in prayer by Bishop Kim W. Brown, Senior Pastor of the Mount Lebanon Missionary Baptist Church in Chesapeake, and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, led by the gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Shall we pray? Gracious God, our Father, we pause today to express our gratitude for your grace and mercy that allows us to have the privilege of serving our community. As we begin this session of legislation, we submit to your sovereign authority. We covenant with your Spirit and request your presence to be made manifest in our midst today. That as we sit in positions of leadership and make decisions, that you will be pleased. Enable us to remember that we sit today as representatives of our greater community and are responsible to serve all demographics of humanity as we work corporately together for the good of our state. As we share this day, we pray for an unusual spirit of unity and wisdom to be upon each and every individual that will share. May the vision of this great body be sharpened by the dialogue and gifts of all who are called to participate this day. We ask for a spirit of humility that will allow each of us to be open in our thinking and receptive to ideas that challenge our opinions and ideologies. May we never lose sight of the reason we are here, which is to forward the cause of our great state. We pray for our governor and his cabinet and those around our state in positions of trust. May the discernment of every state representative be used to its fullest extent, that we might steward the legacy of this great commonwealth and continue to build upon the foundation of those whose shoulders we stand upon. When we have concluded our business today, it is our sincere prayer that you are pleased and that all of our decisions become a catalyst of change that will make this great state all that you have ordained it to be. We ask all these blessings in the name of Jesus, who is the Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The members will answer the roll call by indicating their presence on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll.
Mr. Speaker, a quorum is present.
Pursuant to House Rule 3, I've examined and approved the Journal of the House of Delegates for February 8th, 2016. Motions and resolutions under Rule 39 are now in order. Does the clerk have any announcements or communications?
Not at this time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Middlesex, Mr. Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for an introduction.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, we have in the gallery today representatives of the Virginia Association for Hospices and Palliative Care. The association represents the majority of Virginia's 100 hospices. The Hospice and Palliative Care Association was incorporated in 1983 and advocates for quality care for all persons with life-limiting illnesses. Brenda Clarkson, the executive director, is also present. In 2015, Brenda received the Vanguard Award of the Hospice and Palliative Nurses Association. The award recognizes a nursing leader who has uniquely led the way in palliative nursing. Ms. Clarkson was recognized for her pioneering spirit and long-term continuous leadership in the field of palliative nursing. Please join me in giving these fine folks a warm house welcome.
We're delighted to have the visitors with us this morning. We thank you for all your service to our community. The gentleman from Newport News, Mr. Yancey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise for a motion.
The gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, on page 19, House bills on third reading regular, I would ask that my bill, House Bill 897, be re-referred to the House or to the Committee on Courts of Justice.
The gentleman from Newport News, Mr. Yancey, moves that House Bill 897 be referred to the Committee on Courts of Justice. Many in favor of that motion will say aye.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Mr. Speaker, could I have that page number and bill number again so I can take a look at it?
Mr. Speaker, it's page 19, House Bill 897. It's my bill, Mr. Speaker.
Page 19.
And Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to speak to the gentleman about the purposes of the bill.
Get your bill.
Yeah, Clerk, Courts of Justice.
Gentleman from Charlottesville.
No objection.
Many in favor of the motion to refer the bill to Courts of Justice Committee will say aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is referred to the Courts of Justice Committee. The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Lemunyan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for the purpose of an introduction.
Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, we have in the gallery today the fabulous physicians and management team from Inova Fairfax Hospital, Inova Fair Oaks Hospital. Excuse me, it's in my district, I should know. I'm going to ask them to stand. Inova Fair Oaks Hospital is the top-ranked 182-bed acute care community hospital serving the rapidly growing suburbs of Northern Virginia, committed to providing high-quality, safe care and excellent service while continuously striving to improve each patient's unique experience. The hospital has received numerous national recognitions by several rating agencies, including U.S. News and World Report and Health Grades. I hope it'd be the pleasure of the body to welcome the management team and fabulous physicians to the House today.
Delighted to have visitors from Fair Oaks Hospital with us today, and thank you for all that you do. The gentleman from Norfolk, Ms. Hester.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for an introduction.
The gentlewoman has the floor.
Thank you. Bishop Kim W. Brown is the presiding prelate of the Mount Global Fellowship of Churches, affectionately known as the Mount, which has locations in Chesapeake and Newport News, Virginia, and Elizabeth City and Charlotte, North Carolina. As bishop, he brings creative and innovative vision and takes an out-of-the-box approach to ministry, which appeals to all cultures and groups. Since his tenure with the Mount, which began in 1990, he has watched the congregation grow from 75 to over 13,000 partners, with evidence of continued growth. Bishop Brown received his Bachelor of Science in Engineering from Norfolk State University. His academic preparation for the gospel included a Master of Divinity degree received in 1991 and a Doctorate of Ministry degree received in 1998 from Samuel D. Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University. As a result of his servant attitude, respect in the community, and willingness to be used outside the four walls of the church, Bishop Brown has developed close relationships with highly respected ministry and political leaders locally and nationally. In 2004, he was appointed to the Chesapeake Regional Medical Center's Board of Authority, and in 2008, he was named chairman. He is the author of the best-selling book, Marriage Talk. Bishop Brown has been married to Elder Valerie K. Brown since 1989, and God has blessed them with 2 beautiful children and a wonderful grandson. Please give a warm house welcome to my pastor, Bishop Kim W. Brown.
The gentlewoman from Sussex, Ms. Tyler. Could I ask the House to come to order, please? We got that really cool room in the back there. You can go talk if you want to. Eat a cookie while you're at it. Gentlewoman from Sussex.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Gentlewoman has the floor.
Thank you. I am continuing our theme today on a moment in Black history. My Black history moment today is on our First Lady of the United States, Michelle Robinson Obama. First Lady Michelle Obama is a lawyer, writer, and the wife of the 44th and current President Barack Obama. She is the first African-American First Lady of the United States. She has become a role model for women and an advocate for poverty, awareness, higher education, and healthy living. When people ask First Lady Michelle Obama to describe herself, she doesn't hesitate to say that first and foremost, she is Malaya and Sasha's mom. But before she was a mother or wife or lawyer or public servant, she was Frazier and Marion Robinson's daughter. The Robinson lived in a brick bungalow on the south side of Chicago. Frazier was a pump operator for the Chicago Water Department, and despite being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at a young age, he hardly ever missed a day of work. Marion stayed home to raise Michelle and her older brother Craig, skillfully managing a busy household filled with love, laughter, and important life lessons. A product of Chicago's public school, Michelle Robinson studied sociology and African American studies at Princeton University. After graduating from Harvard Law School in 1988, she joined the Chicago law firm Sidley and Austin, where she later met Barack Obama, the man who would become the love of her life. After a few years, Mrs. Obama decided her true calling was working with people to serve their communities and their neighbors. She served as Assistant Commissioner of Planning and Development in Chicago City Hall before becoming the founder and executive director of the Chicago chapter of Public Allies. In 1996, Mrs. Obama joined the University of Chicago with a vision of bringing campus and community together as an Associate Dean of Student Services. She developed the university's first community service program, and under her leadership as Vice President of Community and External Affairs for the University of Chicago Medical Center, volunteerism skyrocketed. Ms. Obama has continued her effort to support and inspire young people during her time as First Lady. In 2010, she launched Let's Move, bringing together community leaders, educators, and medical professionals, parents, and others in our nationwide efforts to address the challenge of childhood obesity. In 2011, Mrs. Obama and Dr. Jill Biden came together to launch Joining Forces, a nationwide initiative calling all Americans to a rally around service members, veterans, and their family, and support them through wellness. In 2014, Mrs. Obama launched To Reach Higher, an initiative, an effort to inspire young people across America to take charge of their future by completing their education beyond high school, whether at a professional training program, a community college, or a four-year college university. In 2015, Mrs. Obama joined President Obama to launch Let's Girl Learn, a U.S. government-wide initiative to help girls all around the world to go to school and stay in school. As First Lady, Mrs. Obama continues her work on issues close to her heart, supporting military families, helping children lead healthier lives, and encouraging all our young people to fulfill their boundless promise and goal for success. Michelle Obama is a role model for women all over the world. She is an outstanding example of what one can accomplish with strong work ethics, values, faith, and education. So today I salute our First Lady, Michelle Obama, as my moment in Black history. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Salem, Mr. Habib.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a request.
Gentleman has floor.
Mr. Speaker, I request that on page 20 of today's printed calendar, House Bill 1232, House Bill 1232, go to the regular calendar for purposes of a floor substitute.
Without objection, House Bill 1232 to the regular calendar. The gentleman from Stafford, Mr. Dudenheffer.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for an introduction.
Gentleman has floor.
Mr. Speaker, in the gallery today is Miss Rayleigh Fisher, and I'd ask that she stand. Rayleigh is a Governor School student at North Stafford High School, and she's taken the week off and will be working in my office. And she's her effort to learn how our state government works. So I asked the House to join me in giving Ms. Fisher a warm House welcome.
Gentleman from Chesterfield, Ms. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I hope they're up in the gallery somewhere, but I would like for the House to give a warm welcome to the Monacan High School Air Force ROTC.
We're delighted to have the ROTC members with us today. Thank you for taking the time to visit your capital. Gentleman from Roanoke City, Mr. Rasul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise for two requests.
Gentleman has floor.
On page 23 of the printed calendar, can HB 1101 go to the regular calendar after engrossment?
Without objection, House Bill 1101 to the regular calendar after engrossment.
And for my second request, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, sir.
On page 4 of the printed calendar, can HB 326 go to the regular calendar?
House Bill 326, the regular calendar. The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, for those that were here 2 years ago, you probably remember my wife coming up one weekend and making a whole bunch of cannolis. Once again, we celebrate Carnival today, and I won't retell the story from 2 years ago, but my wife, being the Italian she is and loving baking, came up this weekend and made a couple hundred cannolis. So I'd like to invite anyone back when they get their lunch today to please enjoy the cannolis we have, and I'm glad I have a large family to share the calories with this year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Richmond City, Mr. Lupasi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rise for the purpose of an introduction.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, today we have the President of the University of Richmond, Dr. Ronald Crutcher, who's a national leader in higher education, accomplished institutional administrator, and a distinguished classical musician. He became president and professor of music at the University of Richmond, July 1, 2015. Throughout his career, Dr. Crutcher has actively promoted access, affordability, and diversity and inclusivity. The university offers a unique combination of undergraduate and graduate programs through its schools of arts and sciences, business, leadership studies, law, and continuing studies. Please join me in welcoming President Crutcher of the University of Richmond today.
We're pleased to have Dr. Crutcher with us today, and we look forward to your years at the University of Richmond. The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for introduction.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in the gallery are members of Equality Virginia who are visiting us for their lobby day. I would ask them to stand. Equality Virginia is a statewide, nonpartisan education, outreach, and advocacy organization seeking equality for all of Virginia's citizens. We believe in a truly inclusive Commonwealth where all are welcome and valued. EV is here to talk to us about how our laws affect the lives of our brothers, sisters, cousins, friends, and colleagues. Please join me in providing a warm house welcome to Equality Virginia.
Pleased to have the members from Equality Virginia visiting with us today. The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Hugo.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, over the last few years, Delegates Albo, myself, LeMunyon, Comstock, when she was here, and others, have worked on trying to get more slots for in-state students to make sure that our people from Northern Virginia, Southside, Hampton Roads, get into the UVA, the William & Mary, the Tech, JMU, all the great schools that we have here. And Delegate Albo and I and others have pushed bills that have said you should have at least 75% in-state students. Because the fact of the matter is some of the schools, including my alma mater, William & Mary, sometimes are 40% out of state. And it's a problem. Because every time this year you get those kids that have got the great SATs, 4.4 GPAs, and they're kicked across the border to other states. And what we found again, Kiplinger came out again and ranked UVA and William & Mary as the top 10 in the nation best schools for out-of-state students, for the kids that are coming across the border. And here's the problem. We've put these bills up, and thanks to working with the majority leader and the appropriations chairman over the last few years, we've gotten more slots, 3,000 more at some of these schools, and I appreciate their help. And the bills every year, the argument from the university has been, Delegate Albo, Delegate Hugo, LeMunyon, others, we just can't support you because we need every dollar that we squeeze from these out-of-state students to fund the university. We need that differential tuition. And you know what? I always thought it was a canard. I think they like the fact that they have so many out-of-state students because their peer group is not the other public schools. Their peer groups, in their mind, are the Harvards and the Yales of the world. And I understand that. But they always went back to that argument, we need the money. Well, this year, one of their board members sent us a note, sent us the documents from the board meetings that said one of the schools takes that money, that differential money that they get from the out-of-state students, they take $32 million. UVA takes $32 million and gives it back to out-of-state students. $32 million of your tax dollars goes back to out-of-state students to give them a tax break. Now, what would that $32 million just at UVA do if you applied it back? $32 million would get the students that are there a $2,000 break on their tuition. The $32 million would go to the goal that Delegate Albo and others and I have. It'll give you another 3,000 slots or more just at UVA for in-state students. Now they say, oh, it's the out-of-state money that we're just giving them a break back. It's not the out-of-state money. It's the money they've killed the bills on year after year. They said, we need that money. We need the money for the buildings. We need the money for the operation of the school. We need the money to keep the campus open. Well, the fact of the matter is it's not. You know, when we make the argument that sometimes it's the University of New York Williamsburg campus or the University of New Jersey Charlottesville campus, they always got a little annoyed when we said it. But when I see that you're sending $32 million, just one university, to across our borders, It just frosts everybody. I've got a woman in my district, just got a rejection letter from UVA. She's volunteered for everything. She takes college classes. Her SATs were probably double what mine were when I was in school. She's got great grades, and she got rejected. And this is what we're fighting for. Now, so when the universities come and tell you that they can't afford it, ask them the question. And that $32 million, that wasn't aggregate. That was one university. UVA sends $32 million. So when they say, oh, Delhi-Hugo and Lemunyon and Albo are being unfair, when they say it's the University of New York Charlottesville campus, no, we're not. And the other schools do it too, just not to the $32 million. So, Mr. Speaker, thank you to the Appropriations, thank you to the Majority Leader for others getting all these extra spots, but there is work to do. We have legislation out there that says you can't give the money to out-of-state students, that tax money to out-of-state students, even if it's taken out of their tuition. You said you needed the money for the university, use it for the university, for the buildings, for the grounds. Or even better, take that money from New York, take that money back from New Jersey, take that money back from Pennsylvania, and give it to our kids from Virginia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman, Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a request and an introduction.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, the request that House Joint Resolution 268 on page 41 of today's printed calendar be taken up out of order.
Clerk will report a resolution.
House Joint Resolution 268 commending Charles Haley.
Gentleman from Colonial Heights.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Charles Haley is a JMU alum and recent inductee into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, so I'd move adoption of the resolution.
As many as favor adoption of the resolution will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Resolution is agreed to. Gentleman from Colonial Heights.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the introduction, I want to introduce a group of Manchester High School students. They're led by their teachers, Margot Underwood and Mike Eakers, who are up in the gallery. The Manchester students are joined by 4 exchange students, 2 from China, 1 from Brazil, and 1 from Germany. The teachers at Manchester used this as an opportunity to sort of teach about Virginia government, so they went to see HWI and transportation today. So I hope it will be the pleasure of the House to give the Manchester students, and particularly our exchange students, a warm round of applause. If they would stand.
We're delighted to have the Manchester students with us today. The gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a request and a point of personal privilege.
Gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, a request, and I've told the patron this, on page 15, if HB 1334 could go to the regular calendar.
Without objection, House Bill 1334 to the regular calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now the point of personal privilege.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, today's Equality of Virginia's day of action, and though they have left the gallery now, they're probably somewhere in the Capitol. Equality of Virginia, as you heard from the gentleman from Fairfax, argues on behalf of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender communities in the state legislature and around the Commonwealth. They work to introduce bills promoting equality and oppose bills that many believe are backward. Today, equality for gay, lesbian, and transgender and bisexual communities is still contested terrain. Equality for other groups, although not as apparent, still remains. The good news, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, is that as we continue to consider these bills, we also profess, and continue to do so, the words from the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yes, the pursuit of happiness. Virginia has frequently been on the front lines of the battle for equality, usually in the legal system, whether it was Brown versus Board of Education. As you remember, one of the cases that went to the Supreme Court as part of that case was a Virginia case. Loving versus Virginia, which was the case that allowed interracial marriage. And of course, Bostic versus Schaefer, which never actually got to the Supreme Court, but got bound up in all the arguments that led to the constitutional rights of same-sex marriage. Now, despite many setbacks in Virginia over the years in terms of equality, it's certainly a lot better than it was 50 years, 10 years, 5 years, even 2 years ago. And part of the reason for these changes in Virginia, ladies and gentlemen, has to do with the legal terrain, which has changed quite a bit. But also, the social values and mores have changed in Virginia as it has around the country. But finally, a big part of the change has to do with economics and what's happening in the economy among major employers to bring about change. I've heard it said before that commerce is the engine of change, and I think that's true regarding this issue as well, because major employers around the Commonwealth, around the country, are recognizing that non-discrimination is good for business. In fact, 91% of the Fortune 500 companies now have non-discrimination in employment clauses in their employer handbooks. And we also know about entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs have difficulty finding talented workers, and they want to be able to recruit them not just in-state, but out of state. To the extent you have a hostile work environment, it's difficult to recruit, and that's especially true in the tech sphere. And if you ask a millennial about this, they would tell you that there's no place for discrimination in employment in Virginia. But, Mr. Speaker, in this session, we are again seeing efforts to take us backward. And instead of working for equality, working to ensure that citizens aren't fired or denied promotion because of their orientation, what do we see? We see efforts to police bathrooms in schools. Instead of embracing equality and working to ensure that people can live where they please, to rent and own houses in places of their desire, we see legislation to prevent a constitutional officer who swears an oath to the Constitution to just say no to carrying out their duties and discriminate because of their personal beliefs. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, carved into the walls of this building are the words of Jefferson, and I quote, "The most sacred of the duties of government is to do equal and impartial justice to all its citizens." Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I hope we will continue to keep those words in mind as we deliberate on these bills for this session. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Simon.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a request.
The gentleman has the floor.
Can House Bill 784 on page 22 go to the regular calendar?
Without objection, House Bill 784 to the regular calendar. The gentleman from Fauquier, Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for the purpose of a request.
Gentleman may state it.
I request that on page 31, House Bill 1096 go by for the day.
Without objection, House Bill 1096 by for the day. Are there further motions or resolutions under Rule 39? If not, the clerk will call the calendar.
Calendar for the Virginia House of Delegates for today, Tuesday, February 9th, 2016. Page 1 of the printed calendar, House bills on third reading uncontested calendar. 3 dozen or so blocks in the 3 dozen or so bills in the uncontested third reading block are as follows. House Bill 10, House Bill 64, 70, 117, 170, 176, 189, page 4. House Bills 267, 289, 326 has been moved to the regular calendar. House Bills 355, 373, 404, page 6. House Bills 412, 428, 442, 446, 541, 572. Page 8. House Bills 582, 600, 608, 624, 653, 667. Page 10. House Bills 668, 669, 671. House Bill 748, 854, 869. Page 12, House Bills 875, 932, 938, 940, 1020, 1056. Page 14, House Bills 1126, 1196, 1275, and House Bill 1334 has been moved to the regular calendar.
Shall the bills pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, no 0.
Ayes 99, no 0. The bills are passed.
Continuing with the calendar, House bills on third reading, regular calendar. House bills on regular calendar. First up, House Bill 518, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to local school boards' public school choice.
Shall the bills pass? Bill pass. Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 57, noes 42.
Ayes 57, noes 42. The bill is passed.
House Bill 1147, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to transient occupancy tax, Arlington County.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 74, noes 25.
Ayes 74, noes 25. The bill is passed.
Turning to page 16 of the printed calendar, House Bill 175, a bill to amend and reenact several sections of the Code of Virginia relating to service of process on the registered agent of a foreign business entity.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 97, noes 1.
Ayes 97, noes 1. The bill is passed.
House Bill 340, a bill directing the Board of Agriculture and Consumer Services to adopt regulations for private animal shelters.
Gentleman from Caroline, Ms. Rorak.
Mr. Speaker, very briefly speaking to the matter.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I've received additional questions from members on this matter, and I'm going to make it as simple as I know how. If you think the action we took last session through Senate Bill 1381 truly changed the law, changed what a private animal shelter can do or cannot do, and brought specificity as to what the purpose of a shelter is, you should oppose this bill. If, however, you think that we should have the transparent regulatory process, having the stakeholders determine what the purpose of private animal shelters will be, you should support my bill. I hope the body will pass the bill.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 53, noes 45.
Ayes 53, noes 45. The bill is passed.
House Bill 19, a bill to amend and reenact 3 sections of the Code of Virginia relating to ministers or other persons authorized to celebrate rites of matrimony, no oath required.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 86, noes 12.
Ayes 86, noes 12. The bill is passed.
House Bill 417, a bill to amend and reenact several sections of the code related to transactions with the Department of Motor Vehicles.
Shall the bill pass?
Please.
Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, no 0.
Ayes 99, no 0. The bill is passed.
House Bill 441, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to non-suits, tolling of limitations, contractual limitation periods.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 99, no, 0.
Ayes 99, no, 0. The bill is passed.
House Bill 560, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to brandishing a firearm, intent, penalty.
Shall the bill pass?
Speaker,
I'm sorry. Oh,
just speaking to the bill for a moment.
gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After having a quick conversation with Delegate Lingenfelter, I just want to say very quickly, a person who pulls out a firearm in the parking lot or a park or on the sidewalk shouldn't be able to simply say it wasn't my intention to frighten that mom or that old guy and his wife. I didn't intend to frighten that person should not be a defense. From the John Lott study on the defensive gun use, 93% of folks, according to John Lott, can defend themselves by simply showing a gun and instilling fear in the alleged attacker. According to the gun industry's own data, the brandishing, their word, of a gun intrinsically instills fear. But now, this bill is saying that holding, pointing, or even brandishing a gun shouldn't create fear in an individual. If showing a gun can induce sufficient fear to stop a criminal in their tracks, why should we not assume that showing a gun to an innocent person will not induce fear equal or greater? Either it's going to instill fear or it's not. Which is it? Because it can't be both. It's also come to my attention that this brandishing provision is used a great deal by prosecutors against gang members in Virginia, and this bill would make the prosecutor's job harder. I think this bill has serious unintended consequences, and I hope it's the will of the body to vote against this legislation.
The gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Lingenfelter.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of the bill,
Gentleman has the floor.
I think it's always good to have clearly instated intent in the law so that when prosecutors are doing their work and judges are judging cases, that they have a clear understanding of intent. That is the purpose of the bill, and I'd encourage you to vote for it.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 68, noes 32.
Ayes 68, noes 32. The bill is passed.
Turning to page 18, continuing with House bills on third reading regular. House Bill 939, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to auxiliary lights on motorcycles and autocycles.
Shall the bill pass? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, no 0.
Ayes 100, no 0. The bill is passed.
House Bill 1294, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to multi-jurisdiction grand juries, access to record of testimony and evidence.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 100, no 0.
Ayes 100, no 0. The bill is passed.
House Bill 834, a bill to amend and reenact various sections of the code relating to the Virginia Growth and Opportunity Act, creation of Virginia Growth and Opportunity Board and Fund, establishment of regional councils. Report.
Gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to speak to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, this is the Go Virginia bill, and I know there have been several questions and several points raised on the floor yesterday I would like to address. First of all, it was suggested yesterday that the Go Virginia legislation somehow gives a government handout to business, quote, elites. That is completely wrong. There is nothing in either bill, and that's Delegate Hugo's bill or mine, that justifies that criticism. First, these bills do not provide for payment of incentives to individual companies. That's not the purpose of this program. Instead, these grants go to collaborating localities, educational institutions, nonprofits, or other entities for services and projects designed to help grow the private sector and the region as a whole. Let me give you some example. Think of programs that provide services to startups and small businesses like incubators. Think of co-locating a career and technical education center that would serve all school divisions in the region and then combine that with a training center for veterans. Think of a regional program to help small and medium-sized businesses better access out-of-state markets for their products. So, for example, I'm a supply chain producer for auto parts, and I can get some advice on how to export that to states like North Carolina and Tennessee. Each of these concrete examples are being considered in regions around the state, and none of them involve a handout to quote-unquote business elites. In fact, the Go Virginia grant program requires that grant-funded projects generate matching support from local, private, and other entities, and the more the funds are leveraged, the more people that do the match, the more points you get in the evaluation process. So rather than handing out public money to private companies, this program calls for private companies to contribute along with localities in the state in projects that will foster private sector growth and job creation in the region. Second, rather than handing out tax dollars to businesses, this program does the reverse. It brings business expertise and know-how to bear on how to spend tax dollars on economic and workforce development. Why is that important? I said this in my original speech. We're now ranked 48th out of 50th on economic growth among states. And who knows better than how to fix that than businesses? And it's ironic the way we work down here is I taught school for 30 years, and my comfort level, frankly, is K-12. So if someone has a suggestion dealing with the classrooms, hopefully having been there for 30 years, I instinctively know what works and doesn't work. We have a lot of doctors, and I'm sort of looking around, Doc O'Bannon, Doc Stolley, Doc Garrett, and we have healthcare issues. We instinctively go to them because they know what works. So this is what Go Virginia is about. Why on earth wouldn't you go to businesses, instinctively come up with programs and what works in that region? So that's what this is about. Let me give you one example to show why this business involvement is so important. Next to taxes and regulation, the biggest impediment to small business growth is the inability to find qualified employees. We hear that again and again. At the same time, many people are underemployed because they lack the skills the employers in the area need. We are spending millions of tax dollars on education, training, but the programs are not producing the education skills the private market is demanding. What if you get a representative group of business people in a region to sit down on a regular basis with the school superintendent, the community college president, and others, and what if they also surveyed the businesses and actually asked them what skills and job types training they needed? The result would likely be more education and training aimed at what the private marketplace is demanding. And once again, you've got the business people and educators working together. The result likely being more internship programs and more programs where the businessmen go into the schools and motivate young people. This is just one example of how it would work. I thought also an alarming statement yesterday was one that I've been trying to fight the entire time, and that is these regional councils are going to raise your taxes. And that, once again, could not be further from the truth. All you have to do is read the bill to see there is absolutely nothing in either bill to permit that. First, from day one, the Go Virginia people have been clear on this. Go to their website. The website says no higher taxes, no mandates on localities, no on any new regional bureaucracy, and no to any change in the role of local government. And this legislation reflects that emphatic position. These bills create an entirely voluntary program that focuses on private sector economic and workforce development. But don't take my word for it. This has the support of 80 major businesses and organizations like NFIB. As a matter of fact, since I've been down here, it probably has the broadest support, 8,000 individuals of any program that I've been associated with. The truth is, if you want a private sector alternative to what some call regionalism, you should really like this program. And let me finally refer to my good friend, Delegate Massey, who always says, go with Mr. Market. And the reason why this is sort of based on regions is because private enterprise thinks that way. Businesses large and small tend to operate in regional markets. They follow economic, not political boundaries. They attract their employees from across a commuting region, serve customers from throughout the region, rely on regional infrastructure, and use regional suppliers and vendors and so forth. So this is a market-based private sector growth plan. It has nothing to do with what some call regionalism. So, Mr. Speaker, hopefully those two myths, which I think are very important, I've put to bed, and I hope people will really consider this legislation because I do think it'll be a game changer, and I hope the legislature will pass this bill.
Gentleman, Prince William, Mr. Marshall.
Speaking to the measure.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I fail to see the difference between a direct subsidy to a business and an indirect subsidy to a locality, which then negotiates with the business to train some people to deflect or reduce cost of training that other businesses are going to be incurring. Are all HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning companies going to get these things? Nope. Are all electronics firms going to get the benefit of this? Nope. Are all, any category of company is going to be either in a favored or disfavored position. We are entering into the marketplace as a government entity at arm's reach, but it's nevertheless the state doing it, asking our subordinates in the localities to do this. So I would urge support of a real free market and vote no.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 93, noes 7.
Ayes 93, no 7. The bill is passed.
House Bill 846, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to the Virginia Collaborative Economic Development Act.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 93, noes 5.
Ayes 93, noes 5. The bill is passed.
House Bill 897 has been referred to the Committee for Courts of Justice. House Bill 1060, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to localities towing fees.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 77, noes 22.
Ayes 77, noes 22. The bill is passed.
Mr. Speaker, returning to page 4 of the printed calendar. Page 4, House Bill 326, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to obtaining electronic communication service or remote computing service records.
Shall the bill pass? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, noes 1.
Ayes 98, noes 1. The bill is passed.
And, Mr. Speaker, forwarding to page 15 of the printed calendar, House Bill 1334, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to persons charged with first offense of assault and battery against a family or household member may be placed on local community-based probation, conditions, education and treatment programs, costs and fees, violations, discharge.
Shall the bill pass? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, noes 2.
Ayes 98, noes 2. The bill is passed.
Is that?
The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to move the House stand in recess until 1:15.
The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox, moves the House stand in recess until 1:15. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to.
The House Republican Caucus will meet in House Room 1 immediately upon the recess. Democratic Caucus will meet in House Room 2 upon the recess as well.
The House stands in recess until 1:15. House will come to order. Clerk will continue with the calendar.
Continuing with today's calendar, House bills on second reading uncontested calendar. Second regular uncontested, page 20 of the printed calendar. House Bill 1232 has been taken to the regular calendar. Accordingly, House Bill 111, a bill to amend and reenact two sections of the Code of Virginia relating to the National Guard, reemployment rights, and discrimination in employment. Report for the Committee on Militia, Police, and Public Safety with a substitute.
The gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Lingenfelter.
Mr. Speaker, I move the substitute.
The questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Prince William.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, essentially what House Bill 111 does is guarantees that if a National Guard member here in Virginia actually is assigned to a National Guard organization outside of Virginia, that he now will have the same employment rights that he would have were the unit to be drilling here in Virginia. I move we engross the bill and pass it to third reading.
House Bill 301, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to justifiable homicide reporting requirement. Report for the Committee on Militia, Police, Public Safety with a substitute.
The gentlewoman from Alexandria, Ms. Herring.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentlewoman from Alexandria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, HB 301 requires the state police to report officer-involved homicides, including justified homicides, in the state crime report. The bill also has a requirement for training for law enforcement or public safety officer required to make the reports. I thank the gentleman from Prince William for working with me on this bill, and I move that it be engrossed and passed on to its third reading.
House Bill 304, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to home service contract providers. Report of the Committee on Commerce and Labor with a substitute.
Gentleman from Scott, Mr. Kilgore.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we adopt the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, this bill is a bill from the State Corporation Commission Bureau of Insurance dealing with home service contract providers, and it makes different changes to that law concerning home service contract providers, such as changing it from a biannual process to an annual process, and also clarifies the Virginia Reserve requirements. Hope it be the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Thank you.
House Bill 587, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the Code of Virginia relating to memorials and monuments. Report for the Committee on County, Cities, and Towns.
The gentleman from Franklin, Mr. Poindexter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the body, House Bill 587 relates to the protection of war monuments and memorials. You might recall, probably not, but in 1998, the legislature passed legislation on this subject dealing with war memorials and monuments back to the Algonquin War in 1622 and all the subsequent wars. The issue was this last year in 2015, a judge ruled that it wasn't clear that the protections of the monuments was just for monuments erected after 1998, or whether the protection should be for those established all the way back to 1622. Members of the body, Mr. Speaker, House Bill 587 changes the law so that those protections would extend back to the beginning of Virginia history. Speaker, I would move the bill be engrossed and passed to the third reading.
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield for question?
Will the gentleman
I yield, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask the gentleman, I have a lot of really terrific, beautiful Civil War monuments in my city. And I'm wondering whether there would be, if the city decided they wanted to move a memorial to a different park or a different place, would they have to come to the General Assembly to get authority to do so if your bill passes?
Mr. Speaker, I would say to the gentleman, the current process that we have for doing that, going through the courts or local government actions or whatever, this bill doesn't change that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Request this go to the regular calendar, please, after engrossment.
Without objection, House Bill 587 to the regular calendar after engrossment.
Continuing with the second reading uncontested block, House Bill 600 1084, a bill to amend and reenact several sections of the Code of Virginia relating to the Condominium and Property Owners Association Acts, rental of units disclosure package. Report from the Committee on General Laws with a substitute.
The gentleman from Hanover, Mr. Peace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Hanover.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 684 as amended would make a number of changes to the Property Owners Association and Condo Owners Association Acts, among which would be prohibiting associations from evicting tenants. We mirror the POA and COA in regards to a buyer being able to get out of a contract when the disclosure package is not available. And when there are multiple HOAs and multiple disclosure packets that are required, the 3-day right of rescission does not begin until the last packet or resale certificate has been delivered. Mr. Speaker, this bill has been thoroughly vetted among various stakeholders. I move that the bill be engrossed and pass its third reading.
Thank you.
Turning to page 22 of the printed calendar, House Bill 784 has been moved to the regular calendar. House Bill 832, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to vacancies in constitutional offices, timing of special election. Report from the Committee on Privileges and Elections with amendments.
The gentleman from Augusta, Mr. Landis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first I'd like to move the committee amendments.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendments. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The amendments are agreed to. The gentleman from Augusta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 832 allows that the governing body of any county or city, when a vacancy occurs in a constitutional office and has occurred, that to request in a writ of election that the circuit court order for a special election can be held in the next ensuing general election, and allows that the court then issue the writ. The bill also authorizes the governing body to petition the court to request that no special election will have to be ordered when the vacancy occurs within the 12 months immediately preceding the end of the term of office. Mr. Speaker, this resulted because of an election that occurred in Augusta County because of a special election, and it ended up costing the locality over $67 per vote. Only about 395 people participated. So, Mr. Speaker, I move that the House engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
House Bill 945, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to annexation. Report the Committee on County, Cities, and Towns with a substitute.
The gentleman from Rockingham, Mr. Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the committee substitute.
Question is on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Rockingham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 945 extends the current moratorium on annexation an additional 6 years from 2018 to 2024. It also includes language calling on the Commission on Local Government with input from relevant stakeholders to try to come up with a long-term solution to the issue of annexation. I move the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 1030, a bill to amend and reenact several sections of the code related to officers of election required training. Report of the Committee on Privileges and Elections with a substitute.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would move the substitute. Committee
Questions
substitute.
on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Substitute is agreed to.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HB 1030 requires that officers of election receive the Department of Elections directed training online if they want, at least once during their term or when changes in the law go into place. I hope the bill will be engrossed today and passed on to its third reading.
Thank you. We got moved to House Bill 1101, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to automatic notification of registration of sex offenders, common interest communities. Report for the Committee on General Laws.
The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Villanueva.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, the purpose of this bill is to allow the Association for a Common Interest Community, as defined in the code, i.e. homeowners associations, to request and receive from the state police notice of the registration or re-registration of sex offenders in the same or contiguous zip codes as common interest communities. This bill is an additional protection to help protect our children and families from otherwise potentially undetectable threats. Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Mr. Speaker, that bill will be moved tomorrow to the regular calendar after engrossment. Turning to page 24 of today's calendar, House Bill 1146, 6, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to local permitting or licensure requiring consent of homeowners association prohibited. Report for Committee on County, Cities, and Towns with a substitute.
Gentleman from Arlington, Mr. Hope.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Arlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 1146 simply prohibits localities from requiring a HOA permission before approving any permits. Hope you pleasure the body to engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
House Bill 1182, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to sheriff's standard vehicle markings. Report from the Committee on County, Cities, and Towns.
The gentlewoman from Petersburg, Ms. Aird.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, House Bill 1182 is legislation that allows sheriff's offices to use marked motor vehicles painted in any solid color. Current law requires the sheriff to obtain the concurrence of the local governing body to use any color other than dark brown. Today's modern sheriff's cars have evolved into a reflection of local option and functionality, and the involvement of local government is no longer required. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask that the House engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
House Bill 1209, a bill to amend and reenact two sections of the Code of Virginia relating to landlord and tenant laws, tenants' assertions, forms of relief. Report for the Committee on General Laws with amendments.
The gentleman from Frederick, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the committee amendments.
Question on adoption of the committee amendments. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendments are agreed to. The gentleman from Frederick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this bill tightens up the language in our landlord-tenants. It gives the landlord a little bit more protections in the court system. As it stands now, if a tenant brings an action because the landlord has violated a lease in some way, a landlord can then come to court and by oral motion ask for possession of the property. This lease gives the tenant the notification required by the court that, in fact, there's going to be seeking possession of the property.
Speaker.
The gentleman from Shenandoah, Mr. Gilbert.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask the gentleman if he would want me to ask him a bunch of dumb questions right now that are meaningless, leading him to some strange answer, or in the alternative, like one of his fellow freshmen across the hall, say something, that could be offensive to other senior members. Does he want me to do any of that? I would just ask him, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I don't want to lose out on the opportunity as presented to me here in the House of Delegates.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for another question?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir, I will.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask the gentleman if he feels like he would be left out of this stale and humorless process, I will proceed with asking him several dumb questions. But if he wants to just continue explaining his bill, would the gentleman want to go on and do that, I think?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can certainly clarify the bill if he needs to.
I thank the gentleman.
Gentleman Frederick.
Ladies and gentlemen, to give a more specific answer to this question, let's assume that you own a house in Caroline County that your grass is not being mowed and feral hogs are living in it. And you would require your landlord to come please remove and clean that property, and then it becomes an unhealthy living environment. You have the opportunity as a tenant to go to court when your landlord does not do so, to say, I want to get out of my lease because I need to move because I'm living in an unhealthy relationship with the feral hogs, and my slingshot is just not capable of doing the job. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know, I'm sorry, I tried. I move to engross the bill and pass on a third reading.
Continuing with the calendar, House Bill 1223, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code related to procedures at polling place, provision of voters' full name and current resident address. Report from Committee on Privileges and Elections with an amendment.
The gentlewoman from Fairfax, Ms. Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the committee amendment.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendments. May favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendment's agreed to. The gentlewoman from Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill simply gives the alternative to a voter in providing their name to the election officer who will be saying it out loud as is currently in the code so that all observers can hear it. The voter will be able to either state it or give it in writing. I hope it'll be the pleasure of the body to engross the bill, pass it on to its third reading.
House Bill 1300, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to appointment to Economic Development Authority. Report from the Committee on County, Cities, and Towns.
The gentleman from Middlesex, Mr. Hodges.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, House Bill 1300 allows the Board of Supervisors of Matthews County to appoint from 5 to 7 members to serve on the board of the Economic Development Authority. Under current law, unless specifically provided otherwise, the authority consists of 7 members. I hope it will be the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Page 26, today's printed calendar. Last bill in the uncontested second reading block, House Bill 1322, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to correctional officers, survey upon resignation, termination, employment transition. Report from the Committee on Militia, Police, and Public Safety.
The gentleman from Montgomery, Mr. Rush.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, House Bill 1322 requires the Director of the Department of Corrections to develop a survey for correctional officers who leave service. This will help evaluate employment conditions and improve retention. I move the bill be, I hope it's the pleasure of the House to engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Gentleman from Orange, Mr. Hope.
Mr. Speaker, would the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Yields.
Mr. Speaker, I asked the gentleman, when you meet with a lot of correctional officers, they talk about the disparity in pay that they receive compared to their peers in the federal agencies. Will this bill take a look at the amount that they're getting paid and whether that's a factor and whether they leave their employment?
Mr. Speaker, I'd answer the gentleman that we would look at all factors that result in correctional officers leaving employment, so pay would obviously be part of it.
I thank the gentleman.
Shall the bills be engrossed and passed to third reading? Those in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bills are engrossed and passed to the third reading.
Continuing with today's calendar, House bills on second reading regular. Second reading regular, page 26 of the printed calendar. House Bill 3 has been taken by until Friday, February 12th. House Bill 193 has been taken by until Thursday, February 11th. House Bill 350 has been taken by until Thursday, February 11th. And House Bill 689 has been taken by until Thursday, February 11th as well. First up, accordingly today, House Bill 815, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to the method of execution. Report of the Committee for Courts of Justice.
The gentleman from Manassas, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 815 provides that the Director of the Department of Corrections can certify that lethal injection is if the lethal injection is not available as a method of execution, then electrocution shall be used instead. Also, vice versa. If for some reason electrocution is not available, that they would automatically revert to lethal injection. This bill comes from the problem of major pharma and minor pharmaceutical companies are refusing to sell the compounds needed for lethal injection, and therefore many Department of Corrections agencies around the country, including the Commonwealth of Virginia, do not have the compounds available. Therefore, when executions are coming due, the option that the condemned has we may not be able to carry out the process of justice because one of the methods may not be available. So all this bill does not expand the death penalty in any way, and what the bill will simply do is provide that one of the methods used by the Commonwealth of Virginia will be used. I move the bill be engrossed and passed on to its third reading.
The gentleman from Alexandria, Ms. Herring.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking briefly to the bill.
Gentleman has.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The concern that I have with this bill is that it's overly broad, is exposing Virginia to significant and costly Eighth Amendment litigation to bring executions to a halt in the Commonwealth. The bill, as it was mentioned, the bill does provide that the Department of Corrections Director can mandate the method of execution over the condemned inmate's choice. If you look closely at the bill, it actually will, in my opinion, expand it to include things like firing squads and hanging. If you look closely at the bill, it lines 22 to 24, and that's why I have concern about the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Natchez, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to assure the good lady from Alexandria that those are not methods allowed by the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I believe that would have to come through this body if we were to allow a new method for execution in the Commonwealth of Virginia, such as hanging or firing squad, which is a method in other states, but that is not a method used here. Therefore, the good lady from Alexandria's concerns would be unfounded.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? Those in favor of that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Turning to page 28 of today's printed calendar, House Bill 9, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to voter registration, form of the application, and required information. Report of the Committee on Privileges and Election with amendments.
Gentleman from Spotsylvania, Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the amendments.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendments? Those in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The amendments are agreed to. Gentleman from Spotsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 9 seeks to set a uniform standard across the Commonwealth as to what is required information on a voter registration application. Currently, a lot of discretion is left to local voter registrars as to what constitutes a complete application, and therefore you have kind of a patchwork of what is acceptable and what is not. I would ask the House to engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, does the gentleman have any evidence that the current registration application process is a problem? Isn't this a solution in search of a problem?
Mr. Speaker, I would answer that no, it is not. There is not uniformity across the Commonwealth as to what constitutes a complete application. Also, there were concerns that were brought to me by some voter registrars over proposed actions by the Department of Elections and the State Board of Elections this past year to do what they thought would water down the voter registration application and weaken voter registration requirements through regulation rather than legislation.
The gentleman yield for one more question, Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker.
yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, on line 17 of the bill, I think it is, it says that the applicant shall provide, quote, at a minimum, and then a bunch of information. Does the gentleman envision that this bill will authorize future state boards to propose even more restrictive registration applications than what this bill requires?
No, it would not. It would only requires a minimum of what is necessary to be considered an acceptable voter registration application.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill briefly.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, registering to vote shouldn't be a partisan issue. We all should hope that more people vote in Virginia. We should be trying to make it easier to vote in Virginia, not harder. HB 9 is a step in the wrong direction, in my view. We should not make voter registration about jumping through hoops or penalizing voters who might make immaterial mistakes on their application. This bill, Mr. Speaker, would prevent, for instance, the Department of Elections from moving forward with efforts it is now making to simplify the Virginia voter registration process and improve guidance to general registrars across the Commonwealth with respect to determining material omissions. Moreover, HB 9 conflicts with federal law, which prohibits denying applications for omissions that are not material to determine voter eligibility. The current SBE regulations already differentiate between material and immaterial omissions, and in situations which may not be covered by the regulation, it gives registrars the authority to determine materiality on a case-by-case basis in consultation with the local electoral board and the SBE. We should continue to trust our registrars to make this determination just as they have for many, many years. I urge that the body reject HB 9. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? Those in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 268, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to the Land Bank Entities Act. Report of the Committee on Counties, Cities, and Towns with amendments.
The gentleman from Danville, Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the amendment.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendments? As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The amendments are agreed to. The gentleman from Danville.
Let me tell you why 268 is before you. In the city of So somebody is awake. So in the city of Danville, the population at one time was 65,000. We've lost 20,000 population in the last 15 plus years. 10% of the housing in the city of Danville is vacant. So you can ride down streets and you'll have one house occupied and you'll have 10 to 15 houses that are vacant. The city of Danville is spending $1 million a year to take these houses down. So what this bill that was brought to me by a member of Danville City Council, we assigned this to the Virginia Housing Commission, and Delegate Peace's subcommittee dealt all last year to go through this. And what this will do is authorize a locality or combination of localities to establish a land bank by ordinance. And first of all, they would have to have a public hearing to move a land bank forward. And so some of the sources of the property would be a tax sale on some of this delinquent property that I just mentioned, but it could also be a property owner could to dedicate this property to the land bank, or either local government could dedicate land to the land bank. Now, let me tell you what one thing that it doesn't do is on line 134, the land bank authority shall neither possess nor exercise the power of eminent domain. We don't have eminent domain, and the UN 21 did not call me about this bill. In terms of staffing, this could be a locality could go in together, and two localities could go forward with this. So it's not just residential, it could be also commercial. So the land bank could receive grants from either from the locality, it could be from foundations, or either private individuals. So I would move to engross the bill and move it to a third reading.
Gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Morris.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, on House Bill 268, this is a lot of words for a bill that is simply trying to help some houses in a community. And I certainly don't question my friends from Danville's motivation for this bill, but this is setting up a company, a real estate investment company for localities where they can borrow money, buy and sell homes through this company, hire a staff, and even invest their funds from this. And at the same time, exempts them from the taxes. And my opposition to the bill is not on a community trying to revitalize itself by this downturn of the economy, but there are many other tools available to localities to assist with those blighted properties rather than going into business. That is it a proper function of government to create these corporations and buy and sell properties. I just think that's not the purpose of our government, and they should stay out of that market system. There are other tools available to help with redevelopment of these properties, and that would be my opposition to the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlewoman from Richmond City, Ms. Carr.
Speaking to the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman has the floor.
House Bill 268 authorizes the establishment of a land bank entity. Land banks operate across the United States and are a proven tool utilized by local governments to reduce its number of tax delinquent and often vacant, blighted structures. The goal of land banks is to take these properties in, remediate any issues, and then offer them back out to either the private sector or nonprofit sector for development. This returns formerly tax delinquent parcels back to the tax rolls. Because the land bank is an instrument of government, it enables the government to take a strategic and entrepreneurial approach to redevelopment. The land bank, in partnership with the local government, works to advance the priorities of the locality, whether those priorities be the development of more affordable housing or the redevelopment of aging commercial corridors. HB 268 is an effective tool for our localities. I encourage the members of the body to support the bill.
The gentleman from Rockbridge, Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman from Danville resume the floor for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, I'm looking at the authority granted to this entity, and I see that they do have the power to purchase real estate, among other things. But I'd ask the gentleman, is there a limit on the amount of time that a locality is able to own this property before having to sell it, or is it just an unlimited authority?
I don't know I don't see that there is a limit on the length of time. The idea is, and I'll use my example again, the city of Danville, again, 10% of the housing is vacant. They're spending $1 million a year taking these houses down. So the idea is they're going to take this $1 million and put it into these houses to rehabilitate them so that they can bring these houses back and put them on the tax rolls and let people live in them as opposed to take them and carry them to a dump.
Mr. Speaker, would the gentleman yield for another question?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, I'm looking at the makeup of the board.
What line?
It appears that the lines 58 through 75, and I see that each bank shall be governed by a board of not less than 5 members appointed by the governing body. Are these, I'd ask the gentleman, are these individuals subject to conflict of interest rules under current law? I don't see any in this statute.
Yes, there is a conflict of interest, and again, one locality can do this, several localities can do this, but if you will look down on line 83, it says about the financial interest of the board members, employees prohibited. So I hope that answers your question.
I thank the gentleman.
Yes, sir.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? Many in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 647, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to tree conservation ordinance. Report from the Committee for County, Cities, and Towns with a substitute.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is a sunshine bill. It allows a locality to adopt an ordinance which allows that locality to post signs on property that's proposed to be redeveloped with a single-family home, which notifies the public that a grading plan is pending before the locality. I hope it's the pleasure of this body to engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 759, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code related to taxes for certain local improvements. Report from the Committee on County, Cities, and Towns.
The gentleman from Culpeper, Mr. Freitas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HB 759 would simply add Orange County to a list of 7 other localities that would be permitted to impose assessments at the request of the specific property owners. This was a by-request bill specifically of a development. Developer went out of business. Road needed to be improved. There wasn't a mechanism to do so, and so simply adding Orange County to this existing ordinance would permit them to do so. I hope it would be the pleasure of the body to engross the bill and move to third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 879, a bill to amend and reenact several sections of the code related to alcoholic beverage control, farm wineries, and limited brewing license.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Hugo.
Mr. Speaker, I believe they would move the committee substitute.
And there's a committee substitute as well, sorry. Report from the Committee on General Laws.
Mr. Speaker, move the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute? As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Substitute agreed to. The gentleman from Fairfax.
Mr. Speaker, House Bill 879 clarifies that farm wineries or breweries are located on land zone agricultural, means literally land zone agricultural, does not include the term residential conservation. The way this bill is crafted right now, it was the original intent. I appreciate working with Chairman Gilbert and Chairman Knight on this, Delegate Albo and others. This actually, the way it's drafted, impacts 3 districts, myself, Delegate Albo, and Delegate Murphy. I hope it be the will of the body to engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Turning to page 30 of today's, apologize.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor of that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Now turn to page 30. House Bill 919, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to delinquent water and sewage charges. Report from the Committee on County, Cities, and Towns with amendments.
The gentleman from Williamsburg, Mr. Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the committee amendments.
Questions on adoption of the committee amendments? Those in favor of that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The amendments agreed to. The gentleman from Williamsburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 919 brings municipalities that provide water and waste services delinquency periods in line with other such authorities and most utilities. It also provides flexibility to give that municipality the chance to work with consumers to set up payment plans, get their payments back on track rather than having to cut off their services. I move that the House engross the bill and pass it to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? Those in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 944, a bill to amend and reenact a section of the code relating to the statewide fire prevention code, installation or use of landscape cover materials. For the Committee on General Laws with a substitute.
The gentleman from Rockingham, Mr. Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the committee substitute.
The question is on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. Gentleman from Rockingham.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 944 is a Section 1 bill, and it conveys that the City of Harrisonburg may not have an ordinance that regulates landscape cover materials for the purposes of fire prevention regulations on any property until such regulation has been approved as part of the state-wide fire prevention code and adopted by the Board of the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development. I move the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading. Gentleman, John Falk here, Mr. Weber. Clerk will continue.
Continuing with today's calendar, House bills on second reading, regular calendar. House Bill 1096 has been taken by for the day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, the bill's been taken by for the day.
Motion.
Yeah, if you want to take it up now, why don't you do a motion to reconsider?
No. There are two bills.
Do you want to hear it
I'd like
today?
to hear 1163, sir.
I beg your pardon?
Sorry, 1163. I'm up on the next one as well. I was jumping the gun, Mr. Speaker.
Okay.
House Bill 1096 is taken by for the day. Continuing with the calendar, House Bill 1163, a bill to amend and reenact section of the code relating to recognition of out-of-state concealed handgun permits. Report from the Committee on Militia, Police, and Public Safety with a substitute. And Mr. Speaker, there is a floor substitute as well.
The gentleman from Fauquier, Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would request that the committee substitute be rejected and we adopt the floor substitute.
The questions on adoption of the committee substitute, as many as favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The committee substitute is rejected. The questions on adoption of the floor substitute offered by the gentleman from Fauquier, Mr. Weber. Many as favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That substitute is before us. Gentleman from Fauquier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1163 is now amended, gives authority back for reciprocity back to the superintendent, as the superintendent of state police is the original language intended. The permit holder from an out-of-state must be able to produce a photo ID if the law enforcement officer asks for it. And it also states that we will not honor an out-of-state permit licensee holder if they have had that permit revoked, their Virginia permit revoked in Virginia. It also states that the superintendent shall enter into agreements with other states that have an agreement, that must have an agreement in place for reciprocity. It also has language in there that basically states that if in the future a state requires input from an attorney general, our attorney general shall give it back, or shall give it within 30 days of notification by the superintendent. I move the body engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 1188, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to technical adjustments of certain Senate district boundaries. Report from the Committee on Privileges and Elections.
The gentleman from Henrico, Mr. Farrell.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Before you see a bill that has been requested by the Registrar's Office in Louisa time and time again to make a small technical adjustment to the east end of their county when it comes to the Senate districts. It's strictly technical. It would change absolutely no outcome at all politically, and it's well within the margin that the committee's request as far as technical adjustments. We move the bill be engrossed and passed on to its third reading.
The gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Yes, I'll yield. Gentleman yields.
Yes, and that's a gentleman. I heard him say it made reference to the deviation factors that typically undergird the redistricting. Can the gentleman explain what those are and how this fits within the criteria?
Mr. Speaker, I would say, gentlemen, I believe the Senate always views it as 2%, and this would fall well below 1%.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for another question?
Gentleman yield?
Yes.
Gentleman yields.
I asked the gentleman, is our standard 1%?
Yes, I believe it is.
Follow-up question.
Will the gentleman yield? Gentleman yield? Will
Yes.
The gentleman yield? Gentleman yields.
There's a lot of commotion, Mr. Speaker. Is the gentleman saying that it's still
Yes, I'll
1%? Okay.
Yes, yes, and yes.
Follow-up question.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Yes.
I'd ask.
Speaker, would the gentleman concede that if we had had a percentage that was 2%, this problem would have never occurred?
I'm not on, Mr. Speaker, I would say to the gentleman, this is a Senate district, so I don't know, because this had nothing to do with the House
Okay.
district.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? Many in favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Turning to page 32 of today's printed calendar, House Bill 1237, a bill to amend and reenact section of the Code of Virginia relating to the Richmond Metropolitan Transportation Authority powers. Report from the Committee on Counties, Cities, and Towns.
The gentleman from Richmond City, Mr. Lupasi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 1237 simply gives the Richmond Metropolitan Transportation Authority the power to own and operate a coliseum. So I ask that the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor of that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 1348, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to smoking in motor vehicles, presence of minor under age 8, civil penalty. Report from the Committee on Militia, Police, and Public Safety.
The gentleman from Washington, Mr. Pillion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can we take this back for the day?
Without objection, House Bill 1348, by for the day.
Continuing second reading regular, House Bill 1371, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to prohibition on certain local government mandates upon employers. Reported for the Committee on Counties, Cities, and Towns.
The gentleman from Manassas, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this House bill will basically prohibit local government, cities, or counties to mandate employers provide a higher wage or benefits that go above what the Commonwealth of Virginia allows. We do have a couple jurisdictions in the Commonwealth of Virginia that are doing this, and I move that the bill be engrossed and passed on to its third reading.
Mr. Speaker?
The gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my speak button working. It doesn't sell. Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield? Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask the gentleman if he can tell us how many of these kind of ordinances are out there by local governments that he's concerned about.
Mr. Speaker, no, I can't tell him that.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for another question?
Will the gentleman yield?
I'll yield.
Gentleman yields.
So I'm assuming you're trying to address some kind of problem. Are you aware that there may be a number of contracts already out there that localities have signed with vendors for janitorial services, park services, snow plowing services that might, in effect, pay greater than the minimum wage?
I would assume they do, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for another question?
I'll yield.
Gentleman yields.
What would be the gentleman's opinion about whether this bill, if it's passed, would void all those contracts as being unenforceable?
Mr. Speaker, that would not be my concern at all. My concern is that we do have localities such as Charlottesville, the Gentleman's District, and Alexandria, maybe a couple others, that are requiring that private contractors have higher wage requirements in their contracts or higher benefit requirements in their contracts than what the Commonwealth of Virginia has in the statute. What I would say, Mr. Speaker, is that it's this body. First of all, I'm disappointed that we actually have to bring this bill forward, because I would believe that the Dillon rule would prevent localities from doing this. The fact of the matter is there are some localities doing it, and we have an attorney general who I very seriously would doubt would ever considering suing those localities to stop this practice. Mr. Speaker, the reason I'm bringing this bill forward is to make sure that there's an equal playing field for employers across the Commonwealth of Virginia. The Dillon rule is one of the reasons why we are a good state to do business in, if not a great state to do business in. And I would go on to say, Mr. Speaker, that this bill will also protect the taxpayer of said districts.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield for another question?
I'll yield.
Will the gentleman yield? Gentleman yields.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, so is he saying to this body that if a city or a county issues a request for proposals for a bid for janitorial service or park services or whatever, and the bids come back, and the lowest bid pays the employee $10 an hour, would he oppose that?
Mr. Speaker, I would not impose that. I would oppose localities requiring contractors to have salaries that are above the minimum wage of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
One final question, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yield.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield to as many questions as the gentleman from Charlottesville would like to ask.
I don't believe I'll be saying.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, within the bill, it says that you can't have any policy that requires an employer within the locality to provide an employee with a wage or benefit that exceeds requirement of state and federal law. What if the employer is outside the locality?
What if the employer is outside the locality?
Yeah,
I'm not sure I understand the gentleman's question.
I'm happy to repeat it.
Please.
Has the floor.
Speaker, the bill says that a locality can adopt an ordinance that requires an employer within the locality to provide an employee with a wage or employment benefit that exceeds. So what if the employer is outside of the locality?
Mr. Speaker, I would believe that if he wants to add a friendly amendment, I'd be happy to take that. But what I would say, Mr. Speaker, is that if the employer is doing business within the locality, I believe that would apply, that the work being done within that locality is how that is addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speak to the bill at the appropriate time.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this is popular legislation. We like to go after the localities who want to have their own policies on certain things. But, this, again, is an effort by this state to take away the flexibility of localities to tailor their employment contracts and their contracting with people who provide services to the locality in a way that best suits that locality. If a locality, city council, or board of supervisors wants to have a policy that says we want to have higher wages so that people can pay enough, get enough so that they can afford to support their family, and the taxpayers in that locality say it's okay, then why shouldn't we let them? So, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I hope you will fail to engross the bill.
The gentleman from Virginia Beach, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you. I think there may be a little bit of confusion on the other side of the aisle. This is not my bill, as y'all have heard in the prior 2 years. That's actually coming next week. This is a bill that prevents Virginia from allowing Virginia Beach to do what Seattle's done. It prevents the locality from saying the minimum wage that needs to be paid for all employers in the locality has to be X. $15 an hour, $12 an hour, whatever the case is. It's a bill that prevents the loss of jobs. We've all read the articles. I hear some people on the other side talk about, we've increased the minimum wage before, nothing ever happened. Well, you're right, it wasn't that bad, but technology wasn't where it's at today. open up any paper and see what McDonald's have done out in Seattle. Look at all the new technology that's come around and replaced labor. And the reason that escalated is we raised the cost artificially of labor so much that it went above the cost of the technology to replace it. So what we want to do in Virginia is protect that from happening and be enforced upon businesses by local governments. It has nothing to do with local governments giving a local business a contract. Like I said, we'll debate that next week. This just stops us from being Seattle and having all the problems Seattle is now experiencing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Botetourt, Mr. Head.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, in building on what Delegate Davis just said, another thing that we've got to be considering here is employers that may be providing services in various localities around. If you've got one locality requiring one wage mandate and another locality requiring another wage mandate, it becomes extraordinarily difficult for the employer to do business. It causes tremendous problems. We've got to have one level playing field as one Commonwealth of Virginia. And because of that, we don't need to confuse things. The wages that are paid to employees has to be driven by the market, and that will continue to be driven by the market. If it needs to be higher, as in the case with my own company, I pay way above minimum wage because I want to have good employees. But if I have to start calculating out what I had to do locality to locality to locality, it would become almost impossible to continue to grow. And so because of that, Mr. Speaker, I would urge the body to engross the bill.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? Those in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Continuing with House bills on second reading, regular calendar, page 33 of the printed calendar, House Bill 1386, a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to firearm shows, voluntary background checks, penalties, report for the Committee on Militia, Police, and Public Safety with a substitute. And Mr. Speaker, there is a floor amendment as well.
Mr. Speaker, I move the committee substitute.
The gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Lingenfelder.
Mr. Speaker, I move the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute? As many as favor of that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Substitutes agreed to. Gentleman from Prince William.
Mr. Speaker, there is an amendment to that substitute. I'd request that we deal with that now.
Clerk will report an amendment.
Floor committee substitute. Delegate Lingenfelder offers a floor amendment to the committee substitute on line 33 after the number 3. Line 33 after the number 3, strike the remainder of line 33, all of lines 34 through 36, and through number 4 on line 37.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman Prince William.
Mr. Speaker, the amendment essentially strikes an enactment clause that was on the bill in the substitute that is no longer required given where we are and our overall agreement. And I would move we accept the amendment.
Gentleman from Prince William moves that we accept the floor amendment. As many as favor of that motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Floor amendment is agreed to. The gentleman from Prince William.
Mr. Speaker, now House Bill 1386 requires the Department of State Police to be available to perform background checks for non-dealer sales at gun shows if requested by a party involved in the transaction. The promoter of the firearms shall furnish the Department of State Police sufficient facilities to perform the background checks. In order for the bill to become effective, it used to have this enactment clause, but that clause has now been removed. I move that we engross the bill and pass it to a third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? Many in favor of that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
House Bill 1387, a bill to amend and reenact several sections of the Code of Virginia relating to large pre-election contributions, deadline for disclosure. Report from the Committee on Privileges and Elections.
Gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Lingenfelder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 1387, House Bill 1387 amends the deadline for reporting certain large pre-election contributions from 5 p.m. to 11:59 p.m. on the same day after the contribution is received, or on the Monday after the contribution is received on a Saturday. Now, the reason, Mr. Speaker, is many of us have treasurers who are volunteers. They work, and sometimes when they don't get home by 5 o'clock, they can't get their ministerial duties completed. So this would give them essentially to just before midnight. I move we engross the bill and pass it to a third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Next up, House Bill 1391, a bill to amend and reenact several sections of the Code of Virginia relating to protective orders, possession of firearms. Reported from the Committee on Militia, Police, and Public Safety with a substitute. And Mr. Speaker, there also is a floor amendment.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Ms. Murphy.
Mr. Speaker, I move the committee substitute.
The question is on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Substitute is agreed to. The gentleman from Fairfax.
There is an amendment to the substitute, Mr.
Clerk will
Speaker.
report a floor amendment.
Floor amendment offered by Delegate Murphy to the committee substitute on line 184. Line 184, after the number 2, strike the remainder of line 184, all of lines 185 through 187, and through the number 3 on line 188.
The gentlewoman from Fairfax, Ms. Murphy.
The amendment basically strikes the enactment clause. I move that we accept the amendment.
Questions on adoption of the floor amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Fairfax, Ms. Murphy. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Floor amendment is agreed to. The gentlewoman from Fairfax.
Mr. Speaker, House Bill 1391 is a bill to take firearms away from violent domestic abusers and other individuals who are subject to permanent protective orders. This bill will save the lives of those living in domestic violence situations. I know we have had similar bills, but I am very grateful that this year we have come together in a bipartisan way to find a yes, and I hope that the House will engross the bill and pass it on to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Mr. Speaker, returning to page 20 of today's printed calendar, House Bill 1232, a bill to amend and reenact various sections of the Code of Virginia related to disclosures by and compensation of dealers for recalled vehicles. Reported for the Committee on Transportation with a substitute. And Mr. Speaker, there also is a floor substitute.
The gentleman from Salem, Mr. Habib.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask that the body reject the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Committee substitute is rejected.
And, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to move that the body adopt the floor substitute, and I'd like to speak to that motion.
Want to speak to it now?
Yes, sir.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the body, every year or frequently we see bills that involve auto dealers, the franchises, the manufacturers, and others. This bill, and I'm not going to explain the underlying bill, but this bill deals with recalls in the automobile sale context. The auto dealers work very hard with the manufacturers to come up with a bill that both helped their industry, but they also were very diligent to put in some consumer protection language. So for the first time ever, the bill as introduced required auto dealers to provide a disclosure of any pending recalls. This is a huge consumer protection move. Well, some out-of-state folks who purport to represent consumers decided to try to hijack this bill to advance a broader, what they call consumer protection agenda. The result of that is we are stripping the consumer protection language out of the underlying bill in the committee substitute. And so what you are voting on, if you saw this bill before, is all the stuff that reforms the recall procedure. We really like the language that the auto dealers were voluntarily putting on themselves, and I'm frankly very proud that they were willing to do that. We're having to pull that language out because of some out-of-state folks. So that's why I'm asking you to vote on the floor substitute, which will strip that language out and leave 3 of the 4 parts of the original bill.
The question is on adoption of the floor substitute offered by the gentleman from Salem, Mr. Habib. As many as favor adoption of the floor substitute will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The floor substitute is
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the body, the bill now as it is contains 3 reforms to the recall procedure. Again, this is an agreed-to bill. The auto dealers, the manufacturers worked out. Again, it lacks that consumer protection side, but you can blame the out-of-state folks who decided to cause trouble on this bill. And I would move that we engross House Bill 1232 and pass to its third reading.
Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Mr. Speaker, turning to page 22 of today's printed calendar, House Bill 784, a bill to amend and reenact two sections of the Code of Virginia relating to possession of firearms by persons adjudicated delinquent, military service exception, for the Committee on Militia, Police, and Public Safety with a substitute. And Mr. Speaker, there also is a floor amendment to the committee substitute.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Adams.
Mr. Speaker, I move the committee substitute.
Questions on adoption of the committee substitute? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, HB 784 addresses those persons who were adjudicated delinquent as a juvenile for an offense that would be a felony if they were an adult, but who later serve in the armed forces of the United States. This legislation would allow such persons to possess a firearm and to apply for a concealed weapon permit when they have served at least 1 full year of military service, or in the case that they are no longer in the armed forces, they received an honorable discharge and nothing less than that. Existing law prohibits such possession and application until that person turns age 29. So, Mr. Speaker, I would move that the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading.
The clerk will report a floor amendment.
Floor amendment offered by Delegate Simon to the committee substitute. After line 83, insert number 21, an individual who is listed on the Federal Terrorist Screening Database.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Gentleman may state it.
Mr. Speaker, I'd raise the point of order that given the floor amendment proposed, as I just heard it explained, adds a whole new section, number 21, to the measure that was far beyond the original scope of this legislation or embodied within the title. I would ask, Mr. Speaker, is this amendment germane to this measure and therefore properly before us?
I think that's an excellent question. Would the gentleman from Fairfax care to come up here and plead his case? And you can bring your lawyer with you if you'd like to.
Go up there, pretend like get in the picture. Just say, wait, did you call for a lawyer? A real lawyer? One time, there was a time he was at point of order. We had about 50 people all together. It was funny. It's like everybody just wanted to go there. So we all like just got there. So crazy. John, how long have you been here? Who says that?
I'm going to rule that while the floor amendment does deal with concealed gun permits, its intent is to disqualify a category of individuals. The original purpose of the bill is to reinstate a class of individuals. So while both are of the same object, dealing with concealed weapon permits, they are opposite, competing purposes, and therefore the floor amendment is not germane. Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading? As many as favor that motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Bill is engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Continuing with the calendar on page 34, resolutions, regular calendar. House Joint Resolution 1 has been taken by until Friday, February 12th. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, that completes today's calendar.
Does the clerk have any announcements or communications?
No communications, just announcements for today's and tomorrow morning's meeting schedule. The Committee on Privileges and Elections will meet immediately upon adjournment of the House downstairs in House Room 1 of the Capitol. Privileges and Elections will meet immediately upon adjournment down in House Room 1. That's an additional meeting. The Commerce and Labor Committee meeting will meet immediately upon adjournment of the House over in House Room D. That is a change in time for Commerce and Labor. They will be meeting immediately upon adjournment in House Room D. Then the Special Subcommittee on Energy will meet immediately upon adjournment of the full committee, again in House Room D. All right. And then the General Laws Committee will meet a half hour after adjournment of the House over across the hall in House Room C of the General Assembly building. Then the General Laws Subcommittee number 1 will meet immediately upon adjournment of the full committee of General Laws. Then Subcommittee number 3 will meet immediately upon adjournment of Subcommittee number 1 of General Laws in House Room C again. And then finally, General Laws Subcommittee number 2 will meet immediately upon adjournment of Subcommittee number 3. So they're all stacked in General Laws, one after another, all in House Room C this afternoon. At 4 o'clock today, Appropriations Committee, Health and Human Resources Subcommittee, they will meet at 4 up in the 9th floor Appropriations Room. The last meeting for today, Education Committee's Higher Education Subcommittee will meet at 4. They will be down in the 5th floor East Conference Room in the GAB. Looking ahead to tomorrow, Wednesday, February 10th, County, Cities, and Towns Subcommittee number 1, they will meet at 7:30 in the 8th floor West Conference Room. The Committee on Education will meet tomorrow, but they will be meeting at 8 o'clock in House Room D. This is a change in time for the full Committee on Education. They'll be in House Room D. Military and Veterans Caucus will also be meeting at 8 tomorrow morning. They'll be in the 4th floor West Conference Room. And the Women's Health Care Caucus, they'll be meeting at 8 a.m. In the 3rd floor East Senate Conference Room. Then, next up at 8:30 tomorrow morning, Agriculture, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources Committee. They'll be meeting at 8:30, House Room C. This is an additional meeting for ACNR tomorrow morning, 8:30, House Room C. Also, ACNR's Agriculture Subcommittee. They will meet immediately upon adjournment of the full committee tomorrow in House Room C. That's an additional meeting for ACNR's Agricultural Sub. Appropriations Committee, General Government and Capital Outlay Subcommittee. They'll be meeting tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock up in the 9th floor Appropriations Room. Tomorrow's Education, Elementary, and Secondary Education Committee Subcommittee meeting, that has been canceled. So Ed, Elementary, and Secondary Sub is canceled. Accordingly, the Democratic Caucus will meet at 11:30 a.m. and down in House Room 2. The Republican Caucus will meet at 11:30 in House Room 1. Mr. Speaker, that completes the announcements I have at this time.
Gentleman, Prince William, Mr. Langenfelder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just rise for an announcement.
Gentleman has the floor.
Just want to give the Militia, Police, and Public Safety Committee a warning order that we may have a very brief meeting at 0800 hours on Friday morning. Shouldn't be there long. We have a few bills to consider, and then we will promptly adjourn.
Gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox.
Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourn today, adjourn to reconvene tomorrow at 12 noon.
The gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox, moves that when the House adjourn today, adjourn to reconvene tomorrow at 12 noon. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to. The gentleman from Colonial Heights.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House to now adjourn.
Gentleman from Colonial Heights, Mr. Cox, moves the House to now adjourn. As many as favor that motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. That motion is agreed to. The House stands adjourned until 12 noon tomorrow.